All right, folks, how you doing? So, welcome to a new series. This one is called "The Silurian Wars with Rome," and it's a five-parter. So, let's get started. So, disclaimer. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comments, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and of course, research. The Great Deception. Once again, we're heading into Commons Beaumont territory. So let's get started. So the long wars with Rome. In the long wars with Rome, the predominant opponents were those known in such recorded history as exists as Silures, who were actually Jewish people, known also to the Greeks as Illyrians, and whose ill-fated courage and resistance persisted for over 200 years until finally they were expelled from their city of Jerusalem. And this period, by tradition, is AD 66. It is convenient, however, to first appraise their near neighbours and close allies, the Brigantes, the people of Alba, who were originally Trojans or Phrygians, and who settled in Scotland, in a part of Ireland, and also on the Isle of Man. Geoffrey of Monmouth claims them as the paramount race in Britain and the ancestors of the later Romans. He states that when Caesar espied the shores of Britain from the coast of Flanders and learnt the name of its people, he exclaimed, "By Hercules, we Romans and these Bretons be of one ancestry, for we also are of Trojan stock." Records definitely point to a Trojan settlement and that the name Britain was derived from Brutus, though this claim is somewhat dubious. The Welsh Triads. The Welsh Triads declare that of, quote, the three pillars of the nation, the first was Hugadaren, who led the Cymry first to the Isle. The Cymry is the old name for the Welsh, by the way. The second was Prydain, son of Enaid, or Aid, the great Aeneas, who first organized a social state and sovereignty in Britain. The third was Dwywel Molmud, who first made the laws, maxims, customs, and privileges of the country and tribe, otherwise Dunwallow, king of Cornwall, who established the Mulmatine laws. Prydain is another name for Brutus in the above description. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. So in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the Bridwalas are mentioned as the earliest inhabitants of Bryteen, except for the Scots and the Picts. Originally, they were called Walas, signifying stranger. That's where you get the surname Wallace from, incidentally. These records relate to their occupation of part of Britain not long after the Great Catastrophe. An instructive sidelight on Brutus and the Trojans of Alba, or Albion, as their territories were named, is contained in a quaint poem of the Dalriads, erst descendants of the Argives who ruled in Ulster and part of Argyll and the Hebridean Isles, and who appear to have been descendants of the original Danai or Dedanan. The Otadini lands. So the verse says this, quote, "Ye learned of all Alban, ye wise yellow-haired race, learn who first acquired the districts of Alban." In other words, they were probably Scandinavian, blonde, Albanus, or Germanic. Albanus acquired them with all his race, illustrious son of, how do you say this? Isokin, Ascanius. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that first one there. Brother to Britus without treachery. From him, Alban of ships takes his name. Britus expelled his intrepid brother over the sea of Icht. Britus acquired illustrious Alban to the lands of Fiachnach Fotherdain. The lands of Fiachnach Fotherdain are identified by Waddell as the Otadini lands of the Fothergane, the counties of Roxburgh and Berwick, adjoining Galloway and Dumfries. Ascanius, son of Aeneas. The motive of the verse is to accuse Brutus of having usurped the throne of Alba by treachery from Albanus, son of Ascanius, and of having driven him across the Sea of Icht, or the Pict Sea, or the North Sea. This poem is of additional interest because its writer knows of no other Alba apart from the settlement of the Albanians, who traditionally, under the aegis of Ascanius, built Alba Longa, and whose descendants far later emigrated and became the founders of Rome. It should also be observed that the Roman writers fail to recognize Brutus, the Prydean of the Triads, but they do agree that Aeneas was the parent of Ascanius, whose son was forced to flee and sacrifice his rights according to the Dalriad recital. Alba Longa. So Ascanius, in turn, was succeeded at Alba Longa by his son Alba Silvius, accorded the name of Silvius because he was born in sight of Silva, the forest. It must be realized from the foregoing that these events occurred not in Greece, in Agris, in the Mediterranean, but in the region of Perthshire, of Fife, and of Stirling, adjacent to the boundaries of Edinburgh, and that they included as well Lanarkshire and southwestern Scotland from the Clyde to the Solway Firth, with the possible exception of Ayrshire. The ancient town of Alva. So in tiny Clackmannan, which occupies a slice of Fifeshire, stands the ancient town of Alva to this day, adjoining the former vast Caledonian forest, which Hector Boas, the medieval Scots historian, states began in the neighbourhood of Stirling, 7 miles from Alva, and stretched to the very north of Caledonia, mostly impenetrable, and the lair of many savage beasts of old times, including mammoths, lions, immense horned white urochs, wild boar, excuse me, elk, and other herds of deer as well as wolves. Here is the Silva, and beyond are the Bretalbane Mountains. Their name derived from Alba or Alba. Nennius, an early historian, after stating that the British kings of Alba called their dynasty after Silvius, continues, quote, Brutus subdivided the land of Britain, whose inhabitants were the descendants of the Trojans, from Silvius Posthumus, whose mother was Lavinia. He was called Silvius, from whom the kings of Alva were called Silvan. He was the brother to Brutus. Posthumus reigned among the Latins, quote, in the ancient Scottish Chronicle, and the De Suta Albania, or Albany, was described as extending from Mons Drum Alban, or the Brendalbane, to the Mare Hiberniae, the Irish Sea, and Ichtgall, Galloway, the Rins of Galloway being Inch, the isle or peninsula of the Gauls. Another version describes, quote, the kingdom of Albany as beyond Brendalbane to Inchgall and Fragmunair, the Solway Firth. And you've got the Mons Drum Alban, the spine of Alba, over on the right. The original territory of the Trojans. So these records confirm one another that the original territories of the Trojans stretched from the Brendalbane Mountains in Perthshire to the Solway Firth, though they did not include the eastern lowlands, such as the Lothians, Harrington, Peeble, Selkirk, Roxburgh, or Berwick. Albany was also known for reasons to be given as Regium, after the original name borne by Galloway and Dumfries. The history of the Trojans, who they were racially, where they originally dwelt, and whether they migrated on a large scale after the fall of Troy, has been entirely misrepresented, owing to the orthodox teaching that they were Asiatics from the coast of Asia Minor. A robust Nordic people. So the fact that they migrated almost bodily, or at least in large numbers, to Britain and Ireland at a period after the Great Catastrophe, when there were great vacant open spaces awaiting inhabitants, should alone have caused historians to pause. The Trojans, who were racially Phrygians, lived nowhere near the Mediterranean, and Troy was never built on the coast or even in the region of Asia. They were a robust Nordic people, yellow haired, says the Dalriac poem, or in other words, blonde, and northern in all their characteristics. Virgil in the Aeneid mentions that they shook hands with one another, a custom entirely alien to the Asiatics, whose ancient method is the salam. The Rio Phrygia, or Phrygia. They raised funeral mounds or barrows, as were customary in the north, along with cromlechs, dolmens, etc., but entirely lacking in the Mediterranean east of Italy or in any part of Asia Minor or Asia generally. The real Phrygia extended from the Danish peninsula west of the River Elbe and along the coast of Hanover and the Low Countries, which later formed the state of Frisia, made so powerful under Charlemagne the Great. They called themselves Franks there, otherwise Gauls, and claimed descent from the original Trojans or Assyrians. All this was part of Asia, a name derived from the Aryan root as, signifying a divine being or godlike. I don't know where he gets that from, by the way. That's the problem with Beaumont. He never properly backs it up. You just kind of have to either believe him or not. Um, it seems to be very much the school of take it or leave it type of alternative historian. So, Odin, the king of Troy. So, according to Scandinavian traditions, Troy lay in the heart of this conception for Odin, who had so many names. We'll get to that. After conquering the north with his armed followers, the Asar, known as Asar men, gave that name to the entire region. From Asgard, the Scandinavian name for Ur, he appointed rulers who met on the high plain of Idavol, quote, in the center of the divine city where he erected a temple of gold with 12 thrones. We are told in the Prose Edda that Odin was king of Troy, and according to Du Chelu, it was the Troja of the later Edda, built by the sons of Bor, who raised altars and temples on Idavol. The legends all point irrevocably to the north of Europe and nowhere bear Asia in their habitation. To be fair, I did look that up, by the way, that Odin was king of Troy. I can't find any evidence for it whatsoever, in all fairness. But then again, I haven't read the Prose Edda at the same time. But maybe he was. I don't know. But I haven't found any evidence that this was actually the case. Well, no, Beaumont's not guessing. He's saying it's in the Prose Edda. Or maybe it's an older version. I don't know. I mean, there's older versions of these, and sometimes things get lost in translations and things like that. But, who knows? I don't discount the possibility. I'm just saying I've never been able to find any proof that that was actually the case. But anyway. So the Uranid pantheon, so fundamentally they were Saxons, according to the scriptures, Assyrians, but Trojans and Assyrians were identical, originating from Babylon. Homer, for his part, gives us a definite clue to the site of Troy. In the Iliad, he describes the Phrygians by the Hellesponts as, quote, from far Ascania's lake, with Phorcys joined. The two extremes were joined by the sea, he implies, from Ascania's lake to that where stood Phorcys. Now, Phorcys was otherwise Orcus, the underworld of the Uranid pantheon, a magical antediluvian underworld, in which Phorcys was an Atlantean demigod or demon who was reputed to carry off men, but not women, to the lower world and keep them imprisoned there. The Gorgons and the Grey, there is little doubt that it related to the mysteries of Kabiri magic and was a myth pertaining to subterranean temples used for initiation rites, closely concerned with the Kabiri deities whose heart or center from the earliest days lay in Ur the Chaldees or Samothrace. Such a possible temple is the still existent chambered subterranean edifice at Mesau. I've seen that, by the way, I've been there. Near the stones of Stennis and Phorcys, son of Oceanus and Gaia, or the Earth, was the eponymous parent of the Gorgons and the Grey, the first being notorious witches with serpents for hair, and the Grey, the three grey-haired crones who possessed but one tooth among the three of them. Both are hyperbolic descriptions of aged druidesses who were prominent in the matter of magic. So the Sea of Hellas or the Heligoland. So they related definitely to Orkney, Phorcys, also parent of Ladon, who guarded the golden apples of the Hesperides, a myth closely wrapped up with the Tree of Knowledge and the Serpent, all relating to the production of magic, was also Orcus or Orkney. Therefore, Homer, in naming him as representing Orkney at one extremity of the sea, gives Ascania's lake as the other extremity as being the home of the Phrygian people. Denmark's early name was Scania or Scania. The origin of Scandinavia widened since to include Norway and Sweden. Sea off the Danish shores, and Hanover was the original Hellespont of the Greeks, the Sea of Hellas, and today the name is probably preserved in the little island of Heligoland and Heligoland Bay. The sons of Gomer of the Cimmerians. Its very name is strange and may signify I go to the land of hell, otherwise referring to Scotland. Here, at any rate, was the other extreme from Forcas or Orkney, where stood Troy. Josephus throws an interesting light on the situation in his identification of the Phrygians, who were, he says, descendants of Japheth, the sons of Gomer, the founder traditionally of the Cimmerians or the Galatai. Quote, of the three sons of Gomer, Ash Anax founded the Ashanaxians, who are now called by the Greeks Rhegians. So did how do you say this? Riphath. Riphath found the Rippians, now called Paphlagonians, and through Grama the Thruggramanians, who, as the Greeks resolved, were named Phrygians. So pretty interesting stuff. And that's only part one. There's 4 more parts. You know. So hope you enjoyed the presentation. And of course, as always, leave your thoughts and comments down below. Look forward to reading them. Take care.